Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going back in time to the late 19th century to uncover the story of Thomas Andrew Williamson.
Oh, okay.
Now, you might not recognize the name,
Right.
but trust me, this is a tale you won't forget.
Okay.
We've got some excerpts from a Wikipedia article and some old newspaper clippings.
hmm
And let me tell you, this guy led a life that was anything but ordinary.
It's truly fascinating. We often think of the 1800s as a time of pioneers and cowboys, but it was also a period of immense social change. And as Williamson's story reveals a dark undercurrent of violence, his life really embodies the complexities of that era.
Absolutely. So, to set the stage,
Okay.
Thomas Andrew Williamson was born in 1831 in Illinois, the son of a wealthy farmer.
Right.
You'd think that set him up for a pretty comfortable life.
Right.
But even as a kid, there were signs that things might not go as planned.
Okay.
What really struck me was his early tendency towards theft.
Oh, wow.
We're talking stealing from a very young age, even attempting to rob a store at just 13.
It's remarkable, isn't it? This early behavior can sometimes be a predictor of a more troubled path later in life.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not always the case, but it makes you wonder about the factors that might have contributed to his choices.
Right.
It's like trying to unravel a mystery, tracing those threads back to understand how someone becomes capable of such acts.
That's so true. I mean, what drives a 13-year-old to try and rob a store? Was it a thrill-seeking thing, a need for control, or was there something deeper going on?
Those are great questions, and unfortunately, we may never have definitive answers.
Right.
But what we do know is that this pattern of disregard for the law continued throughout his life.
And it gets even more complicated when you add in this detail. At 22, he was partially paralyzed due to an illness.
Oh, wow.
The sources don't go into detail, but I can't help but think that such significant physical setback must have had some psychological impact.
Absolutely. Trauma, whether physical or emotional, can shape a person's worldview and influence their behavior.
Right.
It's possible that this event contributed to feelings of resentment,
Yeah.
or even fueled a desire for power and control that manifested in destructive ways.
It's a chilling thought, but it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Now, let's fast forward a bit. Williamson bounced around quite a bit, working for his father, his uncle, even ending up in jail for stealing horses.
Yeah.
But here's where things take a really interesting turn. He joins the Union Army.
Oh, really?
Not once, but twice. First with the 7th Illinois Infantry Regiment, and then later with the 108th.
That's quite a shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
One might assume military service would instill discipline and a sense of order.
Right.
But in Williamson's case, it seems those tendencies persisted even in a structured environment. He was actually caught stealing from fellow soldiers while serving.
It almost feels like he couldn't escape his own nature even in the midst of a war.
Yes, it's a complex picture.
Yeah.
And it's against this backdrop that we encounter his first documented act of murder.
Okay.
It's 1868. And Williamson, along with his brother-in-law and a friend, find themselves in a card game with an older man named August Koch. The sources mention heavy drinking,
Yeah.
which often plays a role in these sorts of tragedies.
Alcohol can certainly lower inhibitions and make people act in ways they normally wouldn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In this case, the situation escalated quickly. Koch accused the trio of cheating. A fight broke out, and tragically, Williamson, with the help of his companions, ended up taking Koch's life.
Wow.
They then buried his body under the house, which speaks volumes about their state of mind at the time.
It's a chilling reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control.
Right.
And the fact that they tried to conceal the crime suggests a level of premeditation, wouldn't you say?
It certainly does. Now, the trio was eventually caught and sentenced to hang for their crime. However, Williamson's sentence was commuted to 20 years in prison due to his lawyer's efforts. He ultimately only served 11 years and was released in 1879.
That raises an important question about the criminal justice system of the time. Was the commutation of his sentence a reflection of his remorse, or was it simply a matter of legal maneuvering? And what impact might this leniency have had on his future actions?
These are questions worth pondering.
Yeah.
We can't know for sure what was going through his mind at the time or what factors influenced the court's decision, but what we do know is that this was a pivotal moment in Williamson's life, one that would have far-reaching consequences.
So after his release, Williamson returns to Illinois, only to discover that his father has passed away.
Oh.
He then decides to move to Missouri, seeking a fresh start, perhaps. He even gets married to a woman named Susan Kirk in 1877.
Okay.
They live a rather nomadic life, selling goods and struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah.
It paints a picture of instability, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's a recurring theme in Williamson's life.
Yeah.
This constant search for stability, but an inability to escape his past.
And that instability seems to foreshadow the events that unfold next. In 1889, Susan Kirk mysteriously disappears.
Oh.
Williamson claims she went to visit relatives in Illinois and later died there from renal colic. He even says he was too poor to have her remains brought back. All sounds a bit suspicious, doesn't it?
Very much so. The conflicting stories, the lack of concrete evidence,
Right.
it all raises red flags. This is where we begin to see a more manipulative side of Williamson emerging, a willingness to weave elaborate stories to cover his tracks.
It's almost like he's testing the waters, seeing how far he can push the boundaries of believability. But at this point, no one really investigates further, and life, as it often does, goes on. Williamson eventually finds himself working as a farmhand for a man named Jefferson Jeff Moore and his son Charles.
Okay.
And as you might have guessed, more disappearances are on the horizon.
Here we see the pattern repeating itself.
Right.
Williamson, unable to maintain stable relationships or conform to societal norms, finds himself in a position of trust within another household. And tragically, this sets the stage for another dark chapter to unfold.
So we're in Missouri in the spring of 1890. First, Charles Moore disappears.
Oh, wow.
Then a week later, his father Jeff vanishes as well. People in the area are starting to get suspicious, and the finger of blame is quickly pointed at Williamson. The sources mention that he had been seen hauling dirt around the Moore farm, which, given what we know about his past, is certainly a cause for concern.
It's like a chilling echo of the August Kof murder, isn't it? The attempt to bury the evidence, the familiarity with the process.
Right.
It suggests a disturbing level of comfort with the act itself.
Yeah.
And the fact that these events occurred in relatively close proximity to each other
Right.
raises questions about the progression of his criminal behavior. Was he becoming more brazen, or was there a sense of desperation driving him to repeat familiar patterns?
That's a great question, and it's right around this time as suspicion is mounting that Williamson does something totally unexpected.
He attempts suicide.
He's found in a park, barely clinging to life, after ingesting a lethal dose of strychnine. What are we to make of this? Was it genuine remorse? Or was it a calculated move to avoid capture?
The timing is certainly intriguing. If it was a suicide attempt,
Right.
it suggests a deep level of internal conflict. Perhaps the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him, leading to a moment of despair.
Right.
Or, as you suggested, it could have been a desperate ploy to gain sympathy or avoid the consequences of his crimes.
Right.
It's difficult to say for certain without knowing his true state of mind at the time.
That's true. But whatever his motivation, the attempt fails. He survives thanks to the intervention of some folks at the Salvation Army. When asked why he tried to take his own life, Williamson claimed he was tired of living and wanted to meet God. It seems a bit convenient, don't you think?
It does raise some eyebrows.
Yeah.
Perhaps he was simply trying to present himself in a more favorable light, hoping to evoke pity or understanding. Or maybe, in a twisted way, he saw suicide as a means of escaping earthly justice, believing that a higher power would judge him differently.
It's a fascinating psychological puzzle. And speaking of puzzles, the mystery of Susan Kirk's disappearance takes a dramatic turn. Remember that farmer who bought Williamson's old log cabin?
Yeah.
Well, he decides to do some digging around the property,
Okay.
specifically in a spot Williamson had warned him not to disturb. And what does he find? Susan Kirk's remains.
The discovery of Susan's body confirms the suspicions surrounding her disappearance
Right.
and sheds light on Williamson's deceitful nature. He had concocted this elaborate story about her death and burial in Illinois.
Yeah.
But the truth was far more sinister. He had left her remains to decay in a shallow grave, all while maintaining this facade of innocence. It's a chilling reminder of his capacity for cruelty and deception.
Absolutely, with the bodies piling up and the evidence mounting against him. Williamson is finally arrested now during his trial. He comes up with some rather outlandish claims. First, he confesses to killing the Moores, but insists he was paid $300 to do it.
Okay.
Then he changes his story and claims he was merely an accomplice who helped bury the bodies. It's like he's grasping at straws, trying to minimize his culpability in any way he can.
These shifting narratives speak to a desperate attempt to deflect responsibility
Right.
by claiming he was hired to commit the murders.
Yeah.
He's trying to paint himself as a pawn in someone else's scheme, absolving himself of the moral burden. It's a tactic often employed by those facing overwhelming evidence, a last-ditch effort to sway public opinion or appeal to the court's mercy.
And it's a tactic that ultimately fails, but there's one detail that really stands out to me at a court hearing. Williamson is seen wearing a hat that possibly belonged to Charles Moore.
Hmm.
And get this, the hat has a dent that matches the victim's head wound. Was this a careless mistake? Or was it a deliberate act of defiance, a twisted way of taunting the authorities?
It's a chilling detail that adds another layer of complexity to his character.
Yeah,
Was it a trophy he couldn't resist, wearing a reminder of his macabre deeds?
right.
Or was it simply a lapse in judgment, a sign of his crumbling mental state under the pressure of the trial? We can only speculate.
Yeah,
But one thing is certain, it didn't help his case.
not at all. The jury ultimately finds him guilty, and he is sentenced to death for the second time in his life.
This time there would be no commutation, no reprieve. Williamson's fate was sealed.
Right.
It's a stark reminder that the wheels of justice, though sometimes slow, do eventually turn.
And despite facing his impending execution, Williamson appears remarkably unfazed. Even as his appeals are rejected, he shows little emotion, almost as if he's resigned to his fate. What are we to make of this apparent stoicism? Was it genuine acceptance? Or was it a carefully constructed facade to mask his fear?
It's a question that has intrigued historians and psychologists alike.
Yeah.
Some believe it was a defense mechanism,
Right.
a way to protect himself from the overwhelming emotional burden of his actions. Others suggest it was a manifestation of his deep-seated nihilism, a belief that life held no intrinsic value, not even his own.
It's a haunting thought, and so on October 31st, 1891, Halloween of all days, Thomas Andrew Williamson is hanged for his crimes. But before he meets his maker, he makes a startling confession.
Mhm.
He admits to all of his murders and his final words. I should have been hung 30 years ago. A chilling admission, wouldn't you say?
It's a haunting statement that leaves us pondering the complexities of his psyche.
Right.
Was it genuine remorse at the end, or simply a final act of defiance? Did he truly regret the path he had chosen? Or was he lamenting the fact that he wasn't held accountable sooner, potentially preventing further tragedy?
It's a question that lingers long after the curtain falls on Williamson's life. And to add a final layer of irony, or perhaps Justice Williamson is buried in a potter's field, a stark contrast to the wealth and privilege he experienced in his early years.
It's a poignant reminder that a life of crime, regardless of its origins, ultimately leads to isolation and anonymity. Williamson's story serves as a cautionary tale,
Yeah.
highlighting the destructive consequences of unchecked impulses and the enduring power of our choices.
Wow, what a journey this has been. We've gone from petty theft to murder, from military service to a suicide attempt. And through it all, this question keeps coming back to me. What drove Thomas Andrew Williamson to commit these terrible acts? Was it nature nurture or some complex combination of factors that we may never fully understand?
It's a question that has haunted criminologists and psychologists for centuries. Williamson's case is a particularly fascinating one because it offers a glimpse into the criminal mind in a time when forensic science and psychological understanding were in their infancy. We can analyze his actions, trace the patterns of his behavior, but ultimately the true motivations behind his choices remain elusive.
Yeah, it's like we're piecing together a puzzle, but some of the pieces are missing, leaving us with this unsettling sense of incompleteness. We know how Susan Kirk died, but we can only speculate about what her life with Williamson was truly like. Was she a victim long before her murder? Was there an element of coercion or control that we'll never be able to fully grasp?
It's a sobering reminder that history is often fragmented, leaving us with gaps in our understanding. We rely on the sources available to us. The court records the newspaper clippings, but those accounts only provide a partial perspective. The voices of the victims are often silenced, their stories lost to time.
And that's why I find these deep dives so compelling. They allow us to delve into the past to try and make sense of these complex narratives, even when the answers are difficult to come by. Williamson's story may be over a century old, but it still resonates today. It raises questions about the nature of evil, the role of societal pressures, and the efficacy of our justice system.
Absolutely. And it underscores the importance of historical research, of uncovering these forgotten tales and learning from the past. Without these efforts, Williamson's story, along with countless others, might have been lost to the annals of time, and what a loss that would be. These stories, as disturbing as they may be, offer valuable insights into the human condition, reminding us that the capacity for both good and evil resides within us all.
So for our listeners who are fascinated by true crime, 19th century history, or the psychology of a killer, I encourage you to dig deeper into this case, explore the primary sources, read the accounts of those who lived during that era, and draw your own conclusions. Who knows what other secrets lie hidden in the shadows waiting to be unearthed?
And here's a final thought to consider. If Williamson had been held fully accountable for his first murder, would the Moores and Susan Kirk still be alive? It's a question that challenges us to think critically about the criminal justice system and the ripple effects of our choices. Do we have a responsibility to intervene when we see signs of trouble, or do we simply turn a blind eye and hope for the best? It's a question with no easy answers, but one that we must grapple with as individuals and as a society.
What a powerful note to end on. It leaves me with a lot to think about. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the life and crimes of Thomas Andrew Williamson. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.